Hi, everybody. For this episode, we're joined by Dion Price from California in the United States. Dion has dedicated most of his adult life to the field of youth and community service. Through his organization, This Youth Generation, he has delivered motivational talks and workshops to youth, parents, educators, and youth workers. His brand of motivational comedy is delivered with both humor and professional precision. Dion, thanks for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's so cool to have you here. I'm so eager to dive in and learn more about you. So let's get going. Right away, I'd like to just find out, how come you decided to dedicate most of your adult life into helping other people and specifically helping young people?
Well, again, it became an organic transition for me, building off of what I've experienced in my upbringing. That really was a challenging upbringing. And as I went to college, to get out of that environment, I joined an organization in college fraternity that started doing volunteer work in the communities that I left up in Northern California. And we started doing community work in Oakland and San Francisco and some of the troubled areas in Northern California. And I saw that some of the youth we were servicing was experiencing the same things I had left in the challenging environment that I left in LA. The poverty, the gang violence, the abandonment, the addictions, and all those things were still surfacing with the youth that we were serving in Northern California. So I kind of became I adjusted my college background into my studies, and that became my life's work from that point on.
Got it. Cool. So it started off by volunteering. The idea that you got into volunteering, was that accidental or was it very intentional? Did you think, I see these young people needing help, I want to get involved in some way? Or did somebody just say, hey, we're doing this thing, do you want to help out?
Well, part of the college fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, I was a part of in San Francisco State. That's the first thing we did. And the organization's background is culture for service and service for humanity. So you pledge to continue that work. And naturally, it became part of my studies, and it really had I had a heartbeat for the work because it was really connected to my culture and my background, and I really developed a real strong and sincere passion for wanting to improve the quality of life of young people, and that became my personal mission, and I connected it with the organizations that I've worked with from that point on.
That's awesome. So did you know right away when you started doing that volunteering that you kind of like this? It's pretty fun to go out and connect with young people. Did you just get that kind of built-in passion right away?
Well, actually, I started, my background, I started dealing with the things that I was experiencing by humor, right? So the hardship that I went through, I dealt with it. Me and some of my family members, older brother, we dealt with it by using humor. Everything's not a laughing matter, but we use humor to help minimize the effects of a very dysfunctional and pretty much tragic upbringing in the environment that I lived in. But it was humor that gave me the really anecdotes and the sustainability to overcome some of those challenges, so you don't self-destruct. I had an alcoholic mother, no father, and growing up in LA was the worst time in history to be in LA during the mid-'80s, during the heart of the crack epidemic, when many people leave, the worst time in history. And I had I was going through high school at the time. So my motivation was I got to get the hell out of LA somehow, some way, right? So right after graduation, everybody's like, hey, what are you going to do? We celebrated. Soon as I graduated, the first thing I did, I had a bus ticket. I got on a bus ticket from LA to Northern California. So before we celebrated, I had a backpack full of everything. Only thing I had was some shoes, backpack, and some cookies, and I was out of there right after graduation. And that kind of I took it from there when I came up here and started using those same humor as a stress release. So I started doing little bits here in some of the local comedy clubs in Oakland and San Francisco. And I found that I was telling the same stories at night as I was in the volunteer work. And when I started working for juvenile halls, I was using those same stories to link and connect with the youth. And that kind of became my teaching style and my approach to connect with young people using humor.
Wow. That's great that you can use humor to describe some of those situations that actually sounds kind of awful. I can't imagine growing up in LA during the times of the riots and all that kind of stuff. And how did you avoid not getting pulled into that lifestyle of drugs and violence and gangs, and which was so prevalent? It sounds like, yeah.
Everywhere you went, it was a mess, and it really came by fear, and which also became a teaching school. Fear is really thought as a weakness for some, but we teach it as a strength because it's a sign of protection. So me not being afraid to be afraid and let people know I'm too afraid. I value my life because I saw some tragic things happen. So my peers would say, hey, let's go here. I said, I'm not going there. Why? Because I'm afraid for my life. And I wasn't afraid to tell them that I was afraid. In high school, I went to Dorsey High School, which is in an area which is where a predominantly gang area is. Unfortunately, I lived on the completely other side of Los Angeles. So I literally had to take a bus ride, 45-minute bus ride to another area that was opposite of this, and they were gang rivals. So I couldn't wear my school colors, right? Because if you're associated with this high school, they must think you may be a part of this gang. So I couldn't wear my own school colors. I couldn't wear red, couldn't wear blue, couldn't wear black because those were associated with gangs. So, I just wore plaid. I wore plaid. I had to be safe. I walk around with plaid on. I wanted to be totally safe, right? And I literally had to change clothes from one time I got from my high school to my home on the other side of town. So it was fear that drove my consciousness. So I had my head on the swivel. I was always conscious. I was almost paranoid about going to social places. So one day I was invited to an event after a high school football game, and all my friends were saying, let's go over here. Well, this party was on 54th Street. And one of the largest gangs in LA at the time was called the Rolling 60s. So I'm like, 54 is pretty close to 60, ain't it? I'm not going. Oh, Dion, you're a punk. You scared. You what? I said, y'all can call me whatever you want to, but I ain't going to no house party on 54th Street. I'm not doing it. So I swallowed my pride. And to this day, what happened that evening was tragic. Someone came up and it was a shooting at this event. And unfortunately, several people was killed and several people was injured. And it's a notorious event that happened in our history in the mid 80s. And it was me not being afraid to let people know to separate yourself from your peers. And those kind of stories, those kind of anecdotes is what drove me. So what protected me was seeing what was happening and not being afraid to say, hey, you know what? I don't want that to happen to me. So I'm going to use my precaution and separate myself from some of those events.
That's a wonderful perspective to let young people know you don't have to be afraid to say you're afraid. That's a real sign of strength, I believe, yes, to just be truthful and honest. And what a great lesson you can teach young people. And your story about that is really inspiring in terms of anchoring the idea of how your willingness to be afraid saved your life, it sounds like.
Yes, indeed. Literally, several times, and not being afraid to. And I tell young people, you're going to get invited to one of those parties today. That happened 30 plus years ago. Is that happening today? Absolutely. And for the young people that I speak to, even today, I say, mind your thing, monitor your environment, make adjustments to your environment, and know when to separate. Right? If you can't control an environment, then you separate from it. And that's a lifesaver to my young people that I speak to today. Just get a feel for an environment. You got to monitor the environment because there may be some hazards in that environment you may not be aware of, but monitor your environment and know when to separate. Mm-hmm.
You talked about your upbringing was pretty tough. You had an alcoholic mother, father that was absent. Can you talk a little bit about your family and how you persevered in that kind of environment?
Yeah. And I did in detail. All of these experiences is depicted in a book called Raised in Hell that I wrote about in 2004, about 6-7 years ago. And it all breaks it down. Raised in Hell, the human hardship of dysfunctional upbringing. And the main characters in the story, besides myself, is my mother who went through this stuff, and my older brother Herman, who sacrificed his young adulthood to help be a father figure for us, right? Mm-hmm. So in that example is that it was those extended family members that supplemented what we did not have, right? So he really set a foundation of what family should be and how you take care of business and go to work every day. He gave me a little bit of a clue of what stability looks like, him and his wife. And that gave me a little bit of an idea of what it should be. So when I got to age, I had a little bit of an idea because not having a direct father, but having a father figure was golden for me.
When you were younger, if you can think back, did you have resentment about that? Were you mad that your dad wasn't there? Were you mad that your mother was an alcoholic?
At some point, I went through a transition where I hated not my mother, but I hated what she was because we was very dysfunctional. We were very unfortunate. There were times where we were not allowed to go to social events because my mother's alcoholism would surface, and it was an embarrassing where she would get intoxicated and start acting out. And it was sad to see me as a 7-year-old monitoring my own mother's behavior and not being able to fully consciously play and interact as a young kid because I got to worry about my mother losing her mind because her drink of choice was called a screwdriver. You know what a screwdriver is?
I do, yeah.
It's vodka and orange juice. So me being a kid, I thought it was just, vodka's clear. So all I would know is she would drink what I thought was orange juice, but I didn't know it was laced with that Russian vodka. And she would drink what I thought this orange and would lose her mind, start cussing people out, start throwing knives at people. And I'd be like, what the heck is in this orange juice? Got these people losing their mind. And I really had this phobia of orange juice until I was about 12 years old. I'd be with my family. They say, Dion, you want some orange juice? I'm like, no, it's bad. But I'm slapping it out of people's head. And I'm over my uncle's house one day. My uncle said, I don't know what's going on with this boy, but if he pour out one more carton of orange juice, I'm going to smack the hell out of it. I was twisted. But, I used some of those lighter moments. We transition. So as my older brother would say, we better laugh about it than cry about it. So we use those trying upbringings, to shed light on it and kind of roll with it. So I had no resentment from my father. I had no resentment from my mother because even though she was at a condition, she was also loving, but she just had this condition, which I knew later called alcoholism, which is just a disease. Mm-hmm. So I can't charge someone for illness, so that's how I saw it, as an illness. So I didn't have any resentment for it.
Wow, that's wonderful insight on your behalf. And to be able to do that at such a young age is really shows how resilient you are. Your brother Herman sounds like a wonderful guy.
Yes.
The fact that he kind of set the example for you. And it goes to show how just one person in your world can really make a difference. It sounds like Herman was instrumental in helping you turn out to be an adult that is fully developed and found your niche in the world. And he sounds great. Do you still connect with Herman now?
Oh yeah, to this day I talk to him at least twice a week, and we connect. And to this day, he really exemplifies unity of family. And he had a young family. He was 20 years old when he took on this responsibility, and he had a young wife and a family of his own. And he was coming to get us every weekend from South Central LA to his home in Compton. But he didn't realize just those little weekend getaways was something that literally could have saved our lives and get us out of the mess we're in, but gave us a little balance, right? And he really just set the tone for being responsible, right? And I have that to this day. When you have kids of your own, it makes you a better father, makes you a better husband, makes you a better family member, because ultimately he says we're responsible for stabilizing our family. And he at 20 years old. And I remember the epitomizing moment when my mother had it was an event where she, due to alcoholism, had a confrontation that led to her being arrested right in front of me at 5 or 6 years old. Police came, arrested my mother through a domestic violence issue with my sister. And we were going on our way to some unknown foster care. My brother was the only one old enough. He was 20 years old, just about to be enlisted in the Army. And he had a 5-year-old little brother, and my other brother who was older than me, he was 8. So we had a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and these people are asking him, do you have the stability to take on these young people, these young brother and sister? He had no stability. He was just going to the Army himself. So he called every family member that we knew, and I can never forget this, but he was in tears because none of our family members, uncles, aunts, were either willing or able to take us. And at that time in the 70s, foster care system was not as sophisticated as it is now. It was kind of a dark hole for young people. Yeah. And I remember his eyes and his face. He's broken in tears. and because he could not do anything because they wouldn't give a 20-year-old who barely had his own stuff together custody of two young people. So we literally, and it's written in the book, how they pulled us away, and I'm hysterically crying, not knowing where these strangers are taking me. And to see him break down from losing his brother and his younger brothers it was an emotional, tough example, but it was at that moment propelled him from that moment to be the responsible individual, because he knew if he had to be the pillar of strength because we had no one else. So it made him the man that he is, seeing him lose his family like that. And he the rest of his adult life, he was that responsible, stable figure for us.
Sounds like a great guy.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
must just be so proud of him and love him so much.
Yeah, and I tease him because and in all the lessons he's a small guy. He's only like 5.
Okay.
5, right? But he also gave me a message that no matter what your stature is, you can maintain respect. He's the most respected individual in all of his community, and he's not that big. I always tease him because he's 5'4", and every time I tell the story, he gets shorter and shorter. 5'4", 5'1", 5. I mean, so it's just a good example of no matter what your stature is, how you represent yourself as a man is how you get and maintain respect. And that's another life lesson for the young people I work with today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story about your early years. It's been really inspirational to hear that. We do need to take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk to you more specifically about your youth work. So we'll be right back.
All righty. It's okay.
And we're back with Deon. And we're back with Deon Price from California, United States. Deon, right before the break, I said I wanted to dig into a little bit about specifics in regards to youth work. I just want to know, from your perspective, how do you know when you're successful when you work with the young people?
Well, it's our job because it may not be immediate. Our work is organic over time, right? We plant seeds. I always use the illustration of planting a seed. We have no control over it growing. Our job as youth workers, parents, and mentors, or whatever, is to plant the seed. And hopefully that seed will become fruitage, and it will result in that individual improving the quality of their life. And we have to be okay with that. We may not see immediate results. So sometimes I don't see it till years later. Very recently, I work at Larkin Street Youth Services, and I'm walking down in the Tenderloin area of San Francisco, which it's kind of a challenging area. And this young woman, looked like she's in her early 30s maybe, walked up and said, "Hey, you're Deon?" I said, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Do I owe you money or something?"
Yeah.
Gosh, right? Yeah. She says, "No, you ran a program years ago called the STARS program at the YMCA." I'm like, "Wow, that's got to be almost 20 years ago. Are you kidding me?" Yeah, she remembered the STARS program was a life skills program I was running and facilitating in 2002 when she was in middle school, early middle school, right? This young woman saw how she took those things that we learned and she gradually advanced herself and got into the career. And here she is, a 30-some-year-old grown woman, remembering those seeds that we planted over 20 years ago. And that's the reward. That's why I see that quite often in our line of work. And sometimes, unfortunately, I don't even remember the young people because now they're grown people. Some young man with a full beard in the family, "Hey, coach." I'm like, "Hey." And I don't remember. Last time I saw you was 10 years old. And those are the real rewards, when these people have really grown into independence and the quality of their life is healthy. That's it for us. That's all we have. And I think that's the fruitage of our labor.
When you have those moments and you meet somebody that you used to work with, like this young woman you were talking about, how did that affect you personally? What did that do to you emotionally and to help, build your passion for young people?
It's validation. It's validation because this work of youth work is very challenging. It's risky. It's high risk. It's emotional. It's political. And there's a lot of failures. In my 30 plus years in this business, I've unfortunately been through countless funerals and have lost many of young people who have not survived the environment that we have unfortunately created for them. So, but those 4 or 5 that has been successful is the fruitage and the validation that we are in the right line of work and I'm making a difference. I always equate youth work to like the game of baseball. I always use like the sports. It's the transition. So if you're in a baseball game or there's like 10, you have to bat 10 times. You're either going to strike out or get put out at least 6 out of the 10 times. That means only 4 times you're going to make something happen. If you do it 3 times, you're great. If you do it 4 times, you're phenomenal. And I compare that to youth work. You may work with 10 young people. Not all of them are going to receive the information. Not all of them are going to respond well. Some of them are not going to be successful. Some are going to end up incarcerated or in violence or in addictions and unhealthy lifestyle. And unfortunately, some of them are going to lose their lives. But the 1, 2, 3, or 4 that will be successful, you have to drive and live with that type of inspiration that everyone you touch can possibly be one of those 3 or 4. Right? And that's how we go. We cannot be overwhelmed by the failures, but we got to be inspired by the successes.
It's a great way to look at it. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to some of the stories you talked about in regards to failure, or even being at funerals of young people we work at. I, too, have had that experience. You're so positive and energetic, and you use humor so well. How do you keep focus on, if you're going to strike out 6 or 7 times that you go to bat, how do you keep a positive attitude and look for that 20 or 30% of success rate?
Well, you don't focus on the 6 negatives. You focus on the positive. This next time, I struck out 9 times, but this 10th one, I'm hitting it out of the park. You got to have that mentality.
You do, yes.
Every young person that you speak to, this one is going to take this information and it's going to reach their heart and their spirit, and it's going to improve the quality of their life. You have to think and be positively sure that you planting that seed. It may not grow immediately, but it's going to be in there. And I've seen that as well. And I always also equate it to a farmer. When you plant a seed, you got to cultivate the land, right? If that soil is not healthy, the likelihood of that seed that you planted is probably not going to become fertile, and it's not going to grow. In the same sense, some of our young people are just not ready to receive this information yet, right? They may be too hard-hearted or too hard-headed or hard-hearted to receive that information at that time. But that doesn't mean that their soil, their mindset won't be ready at a later time. I was a late bloomer at times. I learned there's still some things that I'm learning right now that was planted in me years ago, and I'm just now understanding what that is. There was a coach of mine years ago that sat my butt on the bench and humbled me. I thought I was a superstar little basketball player. This man sat my butt on the bench and made me sit there. And I had all my friends at the game. Like, Dion sitting on the bench, right? This man, I was a pretty good ball player because I missed a practice the day before the game, right? He said, "You think you're bigger than the game?" He sat my butt down, and I was steaming mad, hot as fish grease. We ended up losing that game by 3 points, and I was averaging at least 10 points a game. So he literally sacrificed the championship game to teach me a lesson. And what he did was, that was middle school. After that, I never missed another practice. I never missed a game. All through high school and in college, I show up. And even today, I don't miss work. I show up. This man, little did he know, he planted a seed in me that would make me a very dependable and 100% showing up person. And I passed that on. He had no idea what he'd done, but he taught me a lesson. So I carry that with me. We plant these seeds. It may not become fertile to later, but it's in there. You never know.
Yeah, your coach set you up for success,
yes,
right? He taught you a lesson that you probably carry today. And earlier, you made a reference to we set young people up to fail.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit more. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, Paul, is that they have no control of the systems that they're growing into. And I mentioned this also, and we have no control of the family we're born into. We have no control of the environment we're forced to live in, right? Mm-hmm. So our generation has created an out of reach economic system. The education system is almost out of reach financially. The housing market, at least in California, is ridiculously high. Mm-hmm. So that's no fault of their own. Our generation did this out of greed and irresponsible leadership, right? So, for example, when I was 19, I got my first apartment for $650 in the peninsula of Northern California, right? $650 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. My first car was a VW Bug, You know, I paid $400, $450 for it. So for a little over $1,000, I had a car and an apartment, right? To this day, can our young people, from my own 19, 17 of my young people, can they do that today? In California, that same apartment, literally that same apartment building that I had in 1991, that was $650 a month. You know how much it is now in California? It's $2,900 a month for the same apartment. And ain't nothing changed but the paint. All they did was change the paint. That's only 25 years ago. So look at now, can our young people survive with $3,000 rent and education? I went to college in San Francisco State, $50 a unit. Now it's $500, $600, $700 a unit. Education out of reach. Housing is out of reach. So it's much more difficult for them to survive than it was for us. So we got to be a little bit more diligent, a little bit more patient. We've set them up for failure, in my opinion. When I speak to young people, one of the first things I do is apologize to them. I say, I'm so sorry that you guys have to live in an environment, but I'm going to give you the tools necessary to help you thrive and survive in this mess that we've created for you.
I agree with you, and we're probably the same generation. I think our generation has done a terrible job of taking care of communities and young people. And I don't know what we do to correct that for them, because their deck is so stacked against them as soon as they're born. Yeah, unfortunately. And the consequences are much worse as well, because we've risen the stakes on penalizing and punitively dealing with the young people. Yeah. In middle school, we got into fights, but you weren't getting arrested and thrown in jail for getting into fights. You know, the consequences are much more severe. So part of my passion for young people, particularly young males, is that you have to be smarter and wiser than us, because the consequences that you face are a lot more severe. So you got to be a little bit more diligent. You got to be a little more critical about your decisions, because things will happen a lot worse for you than they were for me. Yeah. It really goes to show how important having somebody in your life like your brother Herman is, because you really have to make a lot of progress in a very short period of time as a young person these days, to put yourself in a situation where you're welcome and where you're in a position where you can receive good things that come to you. Because if you're not ready for that, you'll miss all these opportunities that go by you. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you're doing the kind of work you do. Do you have anything in particular that young people have taught you that you maybe didn't know about yourself, but as you worked with young people, it became clear what you understood was kind of a moral or a lesson that you learned? Oh, just to not assume that we understand their culture. We have to embrace. Each generation has their culture and their identity and those things. We have to be respectful of that. We had it in our generation. We had the Jerry curls and all these weird fashions, right? But this generation has this thing. So what we do, unfortunately, with adults, with our egos as adults, we try to impose or oppress their culture. Now, there's some things that we see that may be a hazard, but we got to respect their culture and not oppress their culture to a degree where you create you disconnect the relationship. So I encourage parents and even instructors, and when I speak to a group of educators, we have to embrace the modern youth culture. Don't disconnect from it. Yeah. If you don't know the culture you're working with, there's a cultural disconnect, and you will not be an effective youth worker or even a parent. And I even looked at my parent. My mother had no idea what fashion trends were. Because she was unfortunate, she would go out and she bought me some upside down Nikes one day when it was in the early 90s. You know, the swoosh goes up, right? She bought me some Nikes where the swoosh was going down. And I didn't know Nikes were new at the time. Do you know I went to school with those upside You're lucky you came home. You know, right? I stepped on campus. Dion got some upside down Nikes. Oh, they were called Eakins, right? And Eakins is Nike spelt backwards and upside down. So, and I didn't know. I was dyslexic at the time, so it looked normal to me. So I rode these Eakins upside down Nikes, and it was traumatized. These kids teased me all day long. I'm throwing the shoes away. The point is, my mom had no idea
how much trauma she could cause by not understanding the culture of that youth generation. Here it is, fast forward, my kids are now. Now they have Nike, they have Jordans, they have Shaqs. So I was buying my kids Shaqs. And I'm thinking, Shaquille O'Neal's a good, but I didn't know that you will get clowned or disrespectful wearing Shaqs in high school. You can wear them in middle school, but you show up on high school campus with some Shaqs, you're going to get clowned like I did. So I had to understand the culture. I had to buy them the Jordans and the shoes. The point is we have to learn the culture. Each environment, if you don't adjust to the environment, you'll become a casualty to it. So I encourage teachers that have been in the generation and in the field for years, humble yourself enough to take some time, learn the language, learn the music, learn with the trends, learn the fashion trends, and learn to connect with the generation that you're working with. You'll be a better, effective parent or youth worker in order to be a director to them. You got to connect with them. That's what I learned from the youth. Learn their culture.
It has been so wonderful getting to know you, Dion. I am so grateful for all you have done for young people for so many years. I think about the seeds you've planted and how many of them are probably sprouting just as we're talking.
Right on.
And thank you for all your service to our young people and making this world a better place, despite the fact that you had a rough start. You really have persevered and are a role model for all of us to look up to. And I love your sense of humor as well.
Thank you for that.
So thanks for being a guest. I really appreciate it.
Right on. I appreciate it. Thank you for doing this. The passionate youth worker is something that this platform is something we need to use to help inspire people around the world. And we're working with the greatest resource in the world, that's human beings.
Couldn't agree more. Before we go, Dion, what words of wisdom or inspiration would you like to leave with our listeners?
I would like to encourage youth workers to don't fall out of love with the work. There's a reason that most of us got into this work. You fell in love with the work. And whatever organization you're with, be it a school district, be it an organization, nonprofit, there's going to be drama. There's going to be challenges. And you're going to hate the job sometimes, but love the work. I always say you can hate the job, but love the work. Do not fall out of love with the work and the reason you got into this business. It's almost like a marriage. There's a honeymoon period. You get married, you're all excited, right? The first few weeks or even a few months, you're in the honeymoon period. And then you realize there's a marriage and, I don't like everything about this person, right? It's the same thing in youth work. Do not fall out of love with the work. Know that you can hate it. Love the job, hate the job, but love the work and keep that passion over and over again so you can continue to affect lives and inspire young people.